Final thing, if it's called Winds and Waves, everybody's been doing fake stuff about Winds and Waves for like months. I really hope they're not called Winds and Waves. Pokémon Winds and Waves was just announced for the Nintendo Switch 2, and honestly, hype. This announcement had literally everything we have always asked for from a Pokémon game. We are finally not in Europe anymore, and it has a 5-year-long development window. The longest ever for a main series title might just give us a not rushed and actually polished Pokémon game. And God knows we need a polished game that runs well because Dive is back. And honestly, these water physics are putting that Switch 2 hardware to the test with this immaculate Pokémon Snap vibes. If Game Freak manages to make these diverse environments feel alive, instead of like Paldea where you walk around to see multiple clusters of 5 Pokémon standing in a circle, we could be looking at peak Pokémon. Honestly, this is a good day. I'm really happy with this announcement. And we got new starters, which is always exciting. Let's see what people are saying on social media. What? Folks, friends, dear strangers online. What? Do you think that this very weird backlash towards Gecqua, and I mean most water starters we've had this past few years, could be rooted in homophobia? Can I get a break? Why do you do this to me? I was writing a video about hoverboards. I wanted to talk about hoverboards. Look how cool they are. And you know, winds and waves? In one version they float in the winds, and the other they cut through the waves. You want gender analysis, right? I guess I did become the internet's assigned Pokemon sociologist. Okay, I guess let's do it, because Pokemon announcements somehow make it so that people don't know how to act normally anymore. It's normal, it's well adjusted to look at a trio of starters and say, hey, I like this one better than this one. This one looks neat. I'll choose it. What's not normal is to look at a Pokemon that was clearly not designed with you as a target audience and call it a slur. And this guy who wrote this slur was apparently also found liable for sexual assault, so I guess I have a point here. And yes, Twitter is hell, and I should leave, I know, but still, 17,000 likes are a lot of likes, so I guess it does entail a little bit of investigation. In my Chikorita video, I did argue that for some people, the 20-year-old hate for my baby could be rooted in a 20-year-old toxic gamer culture that was shaped by ad agencies in the 90s. Gaming was for boys, and Chikorita debuted when the Pokemon games were starting to be marketed at girls, being supposedly the choice for the girls, but I also said that we are way over that because Pokemon is a more diverse fandom now. More girly-coded starters such as Brigatito are now fan favorites, and, well, we grew up. But then, the Gecqua-shaped elephant in the room brings me back to the drawing board, but I'm positive that I can argue my way out of here. Because these are different types of femininity, right? This is a girl. This is something else, something more fluid, like water, something more queer. Dear Stranger Online, have you ever thought why all water starters are a little bit, you know? And to answer that, we will have to talk about some subjects that I have mentioned before. Twinks, martial arts, and yes, the gender of the sea. Water, 7.8, there's too much of it. The most common type in Pokemon history, and in every region you will find dedicated biomes that will spawn only and exclusively water-type Pokemon. I guess with no other type you can find this sort of attention and exclusivity. And if we look at the water starter lineup, there is something really interesting that we are going to notice here. Absolutely no fish. No fish at all. And this might seem unimportant, but I think it speaks a lot to how Pokemon starters are developed. They need to be plushable first. Ever since the jump to 3D, it has always been a bit awkward for Game Freak to figure out what to do with fish Pokemon on land. Lantern, Goldeen, and Luvdisc have for a very long time been awkwardly hovering every time they are not in the water. And I think that's something they avoid as much as possible when designing water starters. If we are going to sell these as plushies, they can't have awkward animations or poses. They need to be ground friendly. So we get turtles and penguins and, well, geckos. The water starters specifically have always had the need to represent water while also being able to be on land. And in early Pokemon designs, this often shows in a bit of an amphibious approach or a more animalistic or swamp thing. This place in between ocean and land where our starters would exist. But if we look at the history of the starters, there is a really fascinating gradient in how they are portrayed. A transition from something very rigid, somehow very masculine concepts, to something else that is more fluid. If you think back to Gen 1, Blastoise literally has water cannons in its back. For a young boy in the 90s, that is the peak of hardcore masculine action figure coolness. Feraligatr is a massive aggressive crocodile, Swampert is a hulking mud monster. These designs represent the dominance and the crashing destructive force of water. But water is not just dominant and strong, it's also fluid and flexible. And I mean, from a game design perspective, it is very common for Pokemon types to represent certain archetypes or some storytelling motifs. Dark types will often represent that a trainer has hidden motives, or poison types can signify stealthy status strategies. Bug types are often used to show growth or evolution from a low level, while dragons often represent rarity, power, or a semi-legendary status, only achieving their full powers at the end game. Or they used to, because these design philosophies changed from what they were in Gen 1, just like Game Freak has changed and the Pokemon audience has changed. In Gen 1, you could never imagine that more whimsical Pokemon such as Tatsugiri, Applin, or Exeggutor could ever be considered dragons. That rarity status that was reserved almost always for pseudo-legendaries has turned into something much more playful. And that same shift has happened to water types, and specifically the starters. If you look back at say Gen 3 and the character arc of Archie, you will see that Pokemon has always treated water as a primal force that originates life, that enables Pokemon to live, but threatens human society somehow, dominant and strong. But water is not just that. I'm going to abstract a little bit here, but when I think of water, there is a famous quote by Bruce Lee that has inspired books and TED Talks, and I mean, I'm not sure if Game Freak ever heard it, but Bruce Lee has been an inspiration for Pokemon localization before, so who knows. Regardless, when talking about the cultural perception of what water is or what it could mean for a martial artist, it's mostly about adaptability. Bruce says, "Be like water making its way through cracks. Do not be assertive, but adjust to the object, and you shall find a way around or through it. Empty your mind, be formless, shapeless like water. If you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle and it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend." And that is a quote that, by reinforcing the duality and mysticism of water, reminds me immediately of Greninja, the absolute pinnacle of aura farming when designing a ninja frog. It was an extremely successful Pokemon, and it literally reached Charizard levels of popularity, receiving special anime forms and stamping the t-shirts of 10-year-olds worldwide. For a starter, for some plush selling, that is the absolute goal. But from a design perspective, hitting that ceiling creates a huge problem for Game Freak. How do you top the coolest water assassin ever made? The answer is you don't. You adapt. You become water. And I think after Greninja, the designers realized that water starters didn't have to be just literal sea creatures or swamp beasts anymore. They could represent something new, flexibility and fluidity. And that sometimes shows in a very queer way, with some gender fluidity, if you allow me the pun, and brings me back to another video that I made, about the gender of the sea. If you watched my video on Lugia, you might remember me talking about Takeshi Shudo, the original head writer of the Pokemon anime. He strongly felt that the sea was inherently maternal, a feminine force that creates life. And it uses she/her pronouns in French. If we look at real-world mythology, the ocean's gender is incredibly fluid depending on where you look. In some traditions, we have fierce, dominant, masculine figures like Poseidon. In others, we have protective feminine deities like Iemanjá. As I wrote, for some cultures, chaos makes the sea feminine, for others, dominance makes the sea masculine. If water can be anything, if it can be formless, if it can flow, if its cultural gender shifts depending on who is looking at it, why shouldn't water starters do the same? So for Generation 7, something changed. Instead of Greninja 2.0, they started exploring water's flexibility in a way that ended up showing through a very queer and feminine lens. We got Primarina, an unapologetically beautiful mermaid singer, even though 8 out of 10 Primarinas have a male gender marker next to their names. One day, I will do a video about how little that matters for our gendered perception of the world, but even though her use in VGC made Primarina really popular, in 2017, Popplio was the most hated starter in Sun and Moon. Maybe because it wasn't Greninja? What followed was the overly shy Sabo and Inteleon, which, for better or worse, is a very slick, flexible, and slimy spy. I mean, I'm sorry, but even though it's the least overly feminine of the starters, this is a twink. And finally, we have Gecqua Valdinilopolis, a flamboyant, unapologetically passionate dancer. Is he gay-coded, or does he just like carnival too much? Well, nobody's ever really straight in carnival, so I don't think there's a difference. And our latest addition is our eyeliner diva, and I find Gecqua's gender presentation just fascinating. Pokemon agrees with me. Look at this emoji choice to talk about it, come on. And a gendered look at Gecqua is very different from the community's view of Sprigatito, for example. The choice of adjectives that fans are choosing have words like diva, cunty, it's almost a drag queen-like sort of femininity. Meanwhile, Chikorita? She's just a clean girl. Light concealer, some mascara, and her choker. Instead, Gecqua kinda slays. But something I really love about this is the water drop on the forehead, almost like it's a Hindu bindi. I know that culturally that's originally from India, and Winds and Waves is supposedly inspired by Indonesia. But with Paldea, the starters also had design motifs from outside the region. We had a Mexican ghost croc, a Brazilian gay duck, and a Mardi Gras cat. None of those are specifically Spanish. For Gecqua, I think there's a good chance there is South Asian inspiration for these features. And for Western eyes, these kinds of foreign traits are often conflated with a queer aesthetic. An aesthetic that was indeed created by POC and immigrant communities. And this is where it gets super crazy, and I might get a bit too excited and maybe overthink, and I will mispronounce stuff, and I'm sorry, but hear me out. In Hindu tradition, the spot between the eyebrows is the Agna chakra. It is said to be the exact point in the body where masculine and feminine energy channels merge, symbolizing the absolute end of duality. It is quite literally the center of gender fluidity. Of course, I'm just rehearsing and being a bit speculative because that's all we have to go off here. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is not really the complete inspiration for Gecqua, and there will be more to talk about once we see its full evolution line. But I believe it is undeniable that not only has there been a shift in how water types are seen and designed since Gen 1, but the backlash by some people is also very real. From Poplio to Quaxley and now Gecqua, the memes don't let me lie, I mean. What is the main difference in how these Pokemon are perceived by an audience? I think it's clear as water that it has to do with a sort of a gendered look, an abandonment of water only as a crashing Poseidonian force, and instead as something that can take different forms, different approaches, that can lure and envelop and change with the tide. And I mean, a firefighter turtle is a neat concept, but I think that water types opening up for new possibilities and shapes and ideas is also really exciting. But then, because it's the internet, I also always have to reinforce, am I calling you a homophobe for not liking a design that embraces fluidity as a way to represent water? No, I'm not. I didn't call Chikorita haters misogynistic, I will never do, and I will never reach any hard truths in any of these social analysis videos, because that's not what it is about, ever. This is never about individual opinions, it's about structures. It's about why 70,000 people agree with a shitty take. While, yeah, Tectone is actually just a bigot, there are many valid reasons for liking or disliking any starters, and you probably have very good reasons for your opinions. This is just an opportunity to look back and say that we can see a change in design. And that change could also be representative of a change in the perception of who gaming is for, who the Pokemon fanbase is today compared to the 90s. Not only a series targeted at young boys, but a series that is enjoyed by young boys, nerdy girls, queer people, autistic people, and people who own way too many Eevee plushies. Whenever we see a change in how Pokemon represents its world and its characters, it's always because of us, a fanbase that is diverse and asks for more diversity. Always. There are really valid criticisms, and many people have called the starter trio one of the least inspired ever, and I have some opinions. As someone who has been through a lot of starters review, let me tell you, they really do grow on you. When Pokemon X was released, Chespin was an easy choice for me, but with ZA, Fennekin is now one of my favorite Pokemon ever. I think I already like all three of the new starters better now than I did 2 days ago. I really didn't like Brault when I first saw it, and then someone said it looks like angry Martin Scorsese, and now I absolutely love it. People in my comment section have also pointed out that there is a cassette beast character named Pombom, which, while I think it's a very unfortunate localization coincidence, Pombom in Japanese is called Pomuken, I also think that the design inspirations here are really different. One is a bonfire, the other one is a bomb, and while Pomeranians are not trademark infringement. Whether we like it or not, there is a clear design shift this generation. Compared to the detailed faces and varied colors of the Galarian starters, these new ones are much more homogeneous and minimalist. People have called them generic or said that Route looks like it came from Palworld, which is a bit unfair. Both developers are trying to design the same thing, something that looks like Pokemon. Anything new will look foreign until we get used to it. Ultimately, it comes down to personal taste and Game Freak's evolving idea of what makes a good design. And bringing new people and new ideas is always going to be a good thing. This game is likely to be Shigeru Omori's final game as a director, and I expect it to really be a love letter to the first game he worked on at Game Freak, the Hoenn games. With the tropical setting, the return of Dive, and references to Pacific Log, I expect many Gentry callbacks in these games. Please bring Contest back, please bring Contest back. And we can already know that Hoenn is on his mind by listening to his Pokopia interviews, and how that game was inspired by Secret Bases, for example. He said that, "When I was working on Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, I was continuously looking for new possibilities for Pokemon. It brought me back to when I started on Ruby and Sapphire, creating those habitats and meeting the Pokemon for the first time. And I think that's what we can expect from Winds and Waves. Respect to the past while bringing in new people and new ideas in a game that, please Arceus, will take the time it needs to give us the Pokemon experience on the Switch 2 that we have always wanted for, and honestly, that we all deserve. Using the sea to create isolated environments was Wind Waker's solutions for telling a grandiose Zelda story on the GameCube with many diverse hubs and islands, and I think that here too it can be used for a really colorful, tropical adventure while using the Switch 2's full capabilities. I need to apologize because my first reaction on stream was to say that it looked too much like Scarlet and Violet, and I believe I was wrong. I think I was just a bit afraid we would get these boring Pokemon clusters again, but from what we saw, the dynamic lighting in Slugma, the greenery, the water, there is care and attention to detail, and that's always a good thing. I think what worried me a bit was the swamp area. Those are still very tricky texture when trying to be more realistic. It also worries me that the Pokemon Center and Pokemart are open in the outdoor environment, just like Scarlet and Violet, which could signify we can't go inside a lot of buildings and a less immersive experience. At the end of the day, I think what is most important to me is that the Pokemon feel like they are living in a world instead of just standing there, waiting for you to catch them. If Omori's Swan Song is really a Hoenn homage and manages to achieve that, I'm positive we are in for peak Pokemon. Even if there is too much water. I think too much water is always good. Makes everything more fluid. I'm really excited to discover all that with you, so don't forget to like the video if this is the kind of conversation you enjoy. And also subscribe to help me sail the deep and treacherous waters of the YouTube algorithm. Winds and Waves is only out next year, but I'm sure there will be plenty for us to talk about regarding Pokopia and Pokemon Champions in the next few days. I hope that I'll see you all there soon. Oh yes, the hoverboards! Like, come on, hear me out. These games are called Winds and Waves. We didn't see any right Pokemon yet. Maybe our right tech for this game is the amphibious board that in Pokemon Waves is a surfboard and cuts through the sea, and in Pokemon Winds is a hoverboard and it flies on land. It makes so much sense!